Okay. Okay. Thanks for joining me today, Michelle, on this case study about our work that we did with you at School Blazer. If you could just introduce yourself and your role and what you did there, that would be fantastic.
Right. Hi, Louise. My name's Michelle Corkett. I'm a creative pattern cutter, and with School Blazer, I was working with software Optitex 3D. So I had joined the company to help implement the software that they had just purchased and make it a business essential for how they were going to change their business to use it.
Fantastic. And so the biggest motivation for School Blazer to use 3D at the beginning, so why you were kind of brought in, was to have a heightened visualization, or for the technical part, what was the biggest motivation?
I think the main emphasis was the visualization because their client, who were private schools in the country, they were teachers, and so therefore they weren't even fashion people. They were people that wanted to have a uniformed look, but they didn't necessarily understand how clothes went together. They didn't understand how clothes were made. And so therefore they would sort of say, oh, we fancy something that looks a bit tweedy, or we fancy something that's got a sort of a Chanel look about it. And it was like, well, how do you implement that into a school uniform environment? And also, how do you make those sort of looks robust and suitable for school children who are going to probably wear the same jacket 5 days a week for sort of a whole term or a whole year? And how is that garment going to stand up, but also maintain the look and the image they want? And so it wasn't easy to actually explain to those teachers, those senior staff and managers, um, the limitations of a school uniform
Yeah.
against the styling and image that they might have had in mind. Because
Yeah.
these schools, they don't have the same sort of ethos as state schools that will tell parents to go and get their school uniforms from Marks and Spencers. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but they're trying to project an image that is unique to the DNA of their schools.
Yeah.
And so therefore they were asking their parents to sort of invest in that image. And so they needed the visuals helped them understand that. Especially when it came to developing the sportswear, which was by far the biggest section of the clothing than, say, the formal uniforms, because the sportswear, they developed individual printing of all the branding. So you had the school branding, but you might also have individual branding for different sports that they were playing, or you would have branding for the different houses or the different levels that they were playing. I mean, especially when we were working on the uniform for Sebra School in Cumbria, they had it's a huge school for sport, and so therefore they had lots of different sports and lots of different houses, and different sort of stories that they wanted to tell. So that was very important to be able to show them the images that they wanted to buy.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, that's a major thing. I mean, obviously with 3D, you
Mm.
get a high sense of visualization of your, of your design, more so than a CAD. But I guess for school uniforms, it's even more tricky than fashion, because you're working with people, like you said, who don't have that, I guess, that creative eye,
Mm.
and that, they don't have that ability to kind of be able to visualize exactly what they want. So then
Mm.
you could, and also with 3D, you can change things in real time. So
Absolutely.
you're able to then, present, and if things need tweaking there and then,
Mm.
change things slightly, which is fantastic. So when we start thinking about like the impacts of the problem being that, your customer couldn't really visualize what you were, presenting. And then, when we start thinking about the impact, because we were brought in to create, the 3D assets of
Mm.
some of the schoolwear collection, what kind of impact did it have when you were able to present 3D models to your customer?
It made it, I think it was made it much more exciting and
Yeah,
much more dynamic. Um, Getting the right kind of avatar and the right kind of look for the children really does sort of help. And even though that doesn't, that's not what you're selling, i.e. the clothes, but if you don't get that right, then they would end up seeing the avatar rather than the clothes.
yeah,
So it's almost like it's an awful lot of work went into getting that child looking right, so it ended up not being the thing that was noticed. And I
yes,
think that was quite a surprising element of the whole project, because
yeah,
what because you don't want to sort of see the wrong color eye, and an eye color is very sort of specific, and if it's wrong, it's a little bit too orange, then it sticks out and it looks a bit weird, and then people are drawn away from what you're actually trying to look at, which is the clothing. Um,
yeah,
and then making the clothing look realistic, I think was very important, because it helped them really properly understand what was going on with the image that they were sort of what they were looking at and what they were going to sort of buy.
And were you surprised at any kind of offshoot benefits as well? So did it make product development easier? Were there savings in time anywhere else in the cycle, or were there savings in cost that you found as well?
I think it did introduce savings doing
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
And when the samples from the factories eventually came in, the amount of tweaking that they had to do was much more reduced. So they might sample that garment maybe 5 or 6 times.
Mm,
Um, and then it reduced that down to sort of 2 or maybe 3 times, which I think was so significant in
yeah,
how they got that product from first concept to actually getting the real garment into the schools and sort of saying, this is what we're going to put make available for you. And
yeah,
then of course most of it is they do make stock, but they were also making to order as well.
yeah.
So it sort of helped get that product off the ground a lot faster than they would have done normally. And then they sort of then they implemented that system through. So that, yeah, through for the other sort of sportswear products. So yes, that really worked. And it did really help having the 3D visuals to present to the school, especially at the time when we did that, because we were sort of still semi in COVID time. So
Yeah.
um, you're doing that online, over Zoom, and it really did help. Um, we couldn't meet in person,
Yeah,
and that was vital. That sort of facility was absolutely vital.
100%. And see, we work quite closely together on the project.
Mm, yeah.
What would you say the biggest impact was that we had within the goals that you wanted to meet within that project?
Um, I think that the best impact is knowing how well you understood what we wanted.
Yeah.
That was really quite important. Um, and that I think that saved an awful lot of time, knowing that you had that expertise to see straight away what we required. And also you also introduced different packages. I mean, you developed different avatars through different packages, and you introduced different expertise, and that was I mean, for me, that was absolutely remarkable because I had never seen anything like that. It was also a little bit scary to think that technology is out there, but um, it was it was just incredible to see the work on the avatars that were done, and then to see how the clothing um, started to sort of build up on them, especially when because I was trying to do a similar thing using Optitex facility. And on Optitex, because it's mainly the production part
Yeah.
software, it's not necessarily for presentation. Um, so I could see very easily the limitations of
Yeah.
what the software can do. So I think Optitex is very good, offers very good presentation facility for um, garment technologists, pattern cutters,
Hmm.
and sort of in-house presentation. But when it comes to sort of customer facing presentation, what you brought to the business was far more dynamic. Um,
Yeah, because I remember seeing some of your avatars that you were doing in Optitex, and like they look like children of the corn. It was quite it was quite funny.
and also because Optitex, they did branch out into a piece of online software called DAS, which was
Yeah.
used predominantly in gaming and creating digital art. And I really struggled with that because they didn't have a lot of um, child orientated. What they did with children was very difficult, and I found it was very difficult to create realistic child avatars
Yeah.
because they were either you were either taking an adult avatar and making it look childlike,
Yeah.
or you were taking cartoonish children and
Exactly.
trying to sort of so I've what I was doing, I was very much limited with the software that I had at
Yeah.
my disposal.
That's
Um, and but it was certainly very interesting, and it was
yeah.
knowing what was out there. Um, but yeah,
Uh-huh.
it was, and also what I did learn is that you don't necessarily, because the whole idea of Optitex was you were actually using the patterns to create um the visuals for the selling, but you
Hmm.
don't actually need, you didn't really need to have factory production patterns in order to do that.
Yeah.
So they were important part of it, but in actually sort of then translating it into digital artwork, they didn't need to be accurate sewing patterns. And so once we cracked that, we had that freedom a bit. So
Yeah, exactly.
it,
And even now, I think that the technology evolves so quickly.
mm,
And now it would be a whole different ball game with
yeah,
AI and being
yeah.
able to do 3D to AI photo shoots. So I think even now it'd be like one step ahead of
Mhm,
what we created in avatar form.
mm,
And then in terms of not needing kind of factory level patterns, yeah, because again, it takes a whole layer of time away
yeah,
where if it's just for aesthetic purposes and it meets
mm,
those aesthetic goals, then things happen a lot quicker rather than,
yeah.
yeah.
I think I think whoever does the artwork clearly also has to have an understanding of clothing
Oh, yeah.
and how clothing works and moves and all the rest of it. But so yes, I think is that was interesting. But
Yeah.
also, I think from my point of view as being a pattern cutter and a technical person, I of course I'm artistic and I'm surrounded by the aesthetic of art. Um, I also found that I was sort of limited a bit in how I was sort of moving into that sort of digital art realm because I've
Yeah.
spent 30 years being a technical
Yeah.
pattern cutter.
Were there any particular areas that you thought were more valuable than others? Or did you think that everything was, you know, valuable within in equal measures? Or did you think, wow, that is really valuable?
Um, Oh, I'm just trying to think back. I think that, yeah, I think once oh, more valuable than others. I'm not sure if I'm the best place to really assess what would be more valuable or not. Um, because I mean, I literally was just blown away by the creation of the avatars and how the clothing looked on them. And we spent a lot of time going through each garment,
Yeah,
and checking how realistic they looked. And we spent a lot of time doing that, which was quite laborious, but it was very important to
yeah,
sort of get that through and get the textures of the fabrics, which that's actually very important because yeah, that and it's sort of that's the bit of the mundane thing, which actually is, yeah, that's probably more valuable,
yeah,
surprisingly more valuable, because obviously everybody's wowed by the avatars and the movement and stuff like that. But if you don't get that detail right, um, then people sort of, because people notice if the pocket's round and not square, you know,
yeah.
and people notice if the lapel is winged up or notched down, you know. So people
Yeah.
notice that thing. So if you don't get those details right, then that creates the mistrust in the customer. So the valuable part is really that being very dogmatic, very mundane, and going through every single thing and making certain that, and what you're doing with the digital is creating that realistic detail of fabric texture and fabric movement, and is it really that silky or is it that sort of rigid, and that's the real valuable bit. And we
Yeah.
spent quite a bit of time doing that, I think.
We spend
um
so much time doing
yes.
that.
Yeah.
In order to get that hyper realism, we're just, yeah,
And yet, and you have to, and also having to spot everything,
yeah,
um because at the end of the day you end up sort of you've got to give that time. You do end up not seeing those certain details. So yeah, it was a that was probably the time that was really well spent.
yeah, I would agree
Mm.
because without that, you end up with 3D CADs, basically,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, flat looking garments that have no hyperrealism, and that wouldn't have, spoken to the goals that you were trying to meet,
yeah.
within that project.
Yeah,
So,
it's surprising. I see it. I mean, when you're sort of flipping through online social media platforms and you see it, and the adverts for the clothing come in, and you can tell that they're just all digital images. The model is the same and the garment is the same. They've just literally put a new pattern on and dropped it on, and it doesn't move with the garment or move around. And it kind of looks cheap, but it also looks like they're scamming you. So having that realism
yeah,
is so important, because I think as this industry moves forward and as this technology moves forward, human beings are going to become more sensitive to um, that sort of, that they're going to become more sensitive to what digital, to the fact that it is digital and it's not real.
yeah,
They're going to know they're looking at a digital image. And so what
yeah,
they're going to look for, you know, it's like buyer beware. They're now going to be looking for the inconsistencies in what they're looking at because they know it's not real.
exactly.
And the more, certainly clothing retail, I mean, I think at some point we'll move to a situation where people will see a garment they want to wear and that garment will be made for them. So we don't actually make anything that's going to end up in landfill. We will always make something that's going to be sold.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's where clothing is, and it's almost gone full circle, because of course that's what it was like, you know, back in the old days when you had tailors. You know,
yeah,
you only ever made what you were going to sell.
that's
Nobody
it.
carried any stock.
Yeah.
Um, and I think this is what our technology is going to take us back to.
It very much supports that model of, a
Mm.
lot of brands can launch. their collections without making one physical sample.
Yeah.
And if you have digital product, you can market your digital product, you can put it on your
Yeah.
website, and then you can like, make to order. In terms of like working with us, what would you say, like, what would you say was your overall experience? And were there areas that you think that we could have improved, like constructively, or, you know,
I think what I would have liked was to have, because I came down, I came down twice.
yeah,
I mean, it was partly limited by my other responsibilities in the company, but I think I would have liked to have had a bit more face to face. I mean, it doesn't
yeah,
have to be all the time. And it's not like it was a difficult, I was only in Northampton. It wasn't like
yeah,
I wasn't coming down from Scotland,
yeah,
so it was so yeah, I think that would have been nice to have had a little bit more. I think what was difficult for me was in within School Blazer, I sort of had two responsibilities. I had to spend 60% of the time on the product development, and I had about
yeah,
40% of the time with your project. And because I was also supporting Mika, um, it became yeah, I sort of like had two bosses, two chiefs, and
yeah,
it's not always the best way to work. Um,
yeah. Um,
definitely.
just to kind of like round things up. Um, so in terms of obviously your experience with us, like what would you say to someone or to a company, to a startup, to a large company who were thinking about implementing 3D? And so this is a two-part question. So what advice would you give to them? Like, how would they approach that? And also, like, what would be your recommendation of us to them? What would be the thing that you think that they would they could press the green light on working
Mm.
with us on, on a 3D project?
Okay, so let's take the first part, which is what's my recommendation for using 3D in a business?
So what advice would you give to someone who was thinking about 3D? Because a lot of people, there's still a lot of resistance.
That surprises me. I think it's definitely people have got to be open-minded. It
Yeah,
is it is happening, and more companies are doing it. So if you've got the resources and if you've got the um, open mind to explore it, then you've got to go there because you will be left behind um, through social media and stuff. So it'll be depending on how big and how much resources the businesses have, on how much
yeah,
digital output they have. But I just think you've got to do it. You know,
yeah,
you've got to go there. It's like the invention of the car. You can't just hold on to the horse just because you like horses. You have got to go, you've got to go there.
yeah.
And that's what we're facing right now. It is coming, and if you don't get on board, it's going to leave you behind.
Completely
Um,
agree. Completely agree.
so, so that would be my advice. And what was the second question, part of the
The
question?
second one would be like, what would benefit, you know, prospective brands and retailers working with us, do you think? Because you've worked with us and you've
Mhm.
been through projects with us. Like, what do you think you could bring to working with someone?
I think what you offer is you offer yes. You basically you assess what's needed, and you offer a yes, and then you offer and look at this. And that was you did bring other options to the experience, and it allowed the business to move on and to think a bit differently as well. And I think that that was really important, and that's the point of having going to somebody who's got who's the conductor of this orchestra of skills, which is what you presented to us. And you presented these people in different parts of the country, different parts of the world, that had that could bring all of these things together. And I thought that was really impressive. So for me, that's what you offered. Um,
Thank you, Michelle.
yeah.
It's been great to hear the insights, like the deeper insights into, you know, how 3D was impacting School Blazer. And
Mm.
also hearing about, it's been great hearing about, how they wanted to use it going forward.